thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to have a budget workshop
All right,
and the dock.
here we go. We'll jump right in. We'll talk a little bit about kind of what we did in workshop number one, and then we'll jump right into some of the considerations this evening, guys. Just as a reminder, we talked about ending 1920 favorably for many purposes. Obviously, we have some savings associated with the COVID shutdown, operationally speaking, and we did have some increases on the revenue side, even though we did not quite hit, obviously, the enrollment projection initially. We also talked a little bit about House Bill 3 and about how the increase in revenue was really 1 year, and we felt that in 1920. Some of the components for 2021 are actually not extremely favorable for us. We're losing the fast growth allotment, and we talked about a few other things. Obviously, limited opportunity to increase revenue. Talked about tax rate compression as your properties go up and so forth. That being said, still not in a terrible position as it relates to that. In part, because of the way we structured the 1920 budget. We recall we plugged in, even though we had the one-time very large increase on a per-student basis for funding purposes, we left many one-time expenses as opposed to inflating the raises beyond what we did last year, which were favorable as well. We did the bonuses, in 1920. We also had one-time expenses associated with capital projects, buses, and so forth. So, all of that said, it leads us into at least having some opportunity for additional funds or additional availability on the expenditure side as well for 2021. As a reminder, obviously, we have a cautious outlook for the next biennium. Comptroller Hager stepped out there today and updated his projection for the current biennium to $4.58 million shortfall. Now, that does not take into consideration the 5% mandatory reductions that he gave to many agencies, but obviously that is continued to increase, which is continued to be deeply concerning. So, getting back to our discussion. Sorry, go ahead. Yes, sir.
And I guess maybe there's still parts of it I'm working to understand, but along with that 4.5 for the next biennium, they were projecting 11.3 billion deficit in this current biennium.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Correct.
So I'm not really sure then what happens to go bring it up to 4.
How much of that can you kick the can down the road, and is it better now or later?
It just added to the.
It's not good.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that it's not good. We know that there's they are supplanting their budget with FEMA dollars, with federal dollars right now, some of the coronavirus relief money and ESSER funds and things of that nature to hold them whole, even us whole, for FSP funding purposes. And so I guess as a whole, like Dr. Stevens mentioned, I mean, it just, makes us want to continue to be as cautious as we discussed in the first budget workshop in terms of limiting our recurring expenses, trying to balance out raise considerations with some sort of bonus and so forth. And obviously, the last thing we want to do would be to want to extend ourselves beyond the available funds we have in preparation of next biennium. Yes, ma'am.
And just to clarify, that's the state level,
Yes, ma'am.
for those that watch this later and don't
Correct.
understand
Yes,
that.
ma'am. Sorry, that is a state of Texas, yes.
State level, okay.
Comptroller Hager, yes, ma'am, stepped out there today. We talked a little bit about last meeting, guys. We didn't delve too deeply, but talked about what some of our peer districts are doing, are able to afford, the ones who can, some raises and bonus packages and things of that nature. Talked about some local scenarios, raises versus bonuses and so forth. And what we heard from you guys, I think, is that you recommended that we try to do a balance of both if we can afford to do so. So that catches us up. So the budget that we're bringing to you this evening, and again, this won't be adopted until late August, but for now, we put the numbers together based on the direction we received from the board last month. It includes, and it certainly can be adjusted, depending on the discussion tonight, but it includes a 2% raise for all employees, and it includes a one-time retention bonus of $500 for all every employee non-administrative to be paid November 15th, which is similar, to what we did this last year, kind of going into the holidays, that kind of approach and good feel, if you will. Now, and we'll talk about this in the regular meeting here in a little bit, but I guess it'd probably be a good time to discuss it now. You know, we talked about what can be referred to as an educator bonus and/or the reimbursement that we had talked about for the distance learning, distance instructional things. That's on the regular agenda tonight, and I know we talked about this last month, and I guess in short, and I think this does kind of help balance the relative minimal bonus that we're talking about for 2021, but instead of the $500 that we were talking about last month, we will be recommending in the regular session tonight an actual payment of $1,000 to be paid immediately, August 1st payroll for all of our educators. So as we look at next year and we look at November and the $500, please keep in mind that we are increasing the recommendation for our teachers for the immediate pay in terms of responding to the costs that they had back in the spring and in preparation of the fall. Okay, so I think that's important. And most of that was driven by our, I guess, desire, if you will, to make sure that we stayed within our lanes and available appropriations for fiscal year purposes. There's so many different ways we could have approached it, but ultimately that allows us to make sure we have a balanced budget next year and that we end this year balanced as well. Okay. And we talked about this a couple months ago, but we are near final on our all medical health insurance options. Well, let me back up. We are final. Open enrollment is going on as we speak. The savings is very, very similar to what we presented in terms of the options to our employees. Fairly substantial savings in many of the plans on the premium side of things, close to $200 a month in several of those. And so we're excited about that. So I don't think you could really leave that out of the discussion. Obviously, it's something that we've decided to take on as a district to give our employees more options and to help save them dollars. So I think it's important to include that in this discussion.
When will you get those final numbers on who chose to stay?
We will know, I forget the ending date for the open enrollment, but within the next 2 to 3 weeks, Chuck will know. We'll know where that lands. And, you know, we have some projections, you know, of around half of them, the existing folks who were participating, we anticipated, you know, making that shift. The interesting thing to me will be to see how many new folks as a whole, you know, take on the district health insurance that weren't on any plan in the past. And so the coverages are very attractive. We're continuing to break those down in terms of the numbers of providers that the Cigna network offers in comparison to TRS, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Aetna for those comparison purposes. And by and large, I mean, they're nearly the same, if you will. And so it's a good thing. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. The deductibles are basically the same. We've created dummy scenarios where if somebody maxed out everything, you can compare one plan to the next in terms of TRS Active Care versus the alt medical to see the total cost. And in every one of those situations, there are savings in the new alt medical. But even for the average employee who doesn't max out, who doesn't meet their deductible and things of that nature, the premium savings on a monthly basis is going to be huge.
Good.
Huge. And like we talked about with the HD plan for the new alt medical, the cost to the employee is $0 on a monthly basis versus about $50 a month under the TRS plan. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal for sure. Yes, sir.
Well, so why would people not make a change? Number one, and then number two, I wondered if you could update on
Yeah.
the latest, the school districts around us, if you heard any more chatter about what they're up to.
Well, I mean, obviously, it took a lot of planning, you know, for us to make that leap. There have been the handful of ones that we talked about last time, Humboldt ISD and a couple in the Dallas area, Garland and so forth. I anticipate, assuming the legislature doesn't jump out there this coming winter and hamstring us from being able to continue this sort of opportunity, that many other districts will jump on board over the next handful of years. In particular, once they're able to you know, perhaps talk with some folks like us about how we've managed our plan and what the end effect is for budget building purposes. But and like we talked about before, we're very conservative with what we've built based on a history of claims and things of that nature, and feel really good about it.
So why would somebody not sign up?
Well, I mean, I mean, I guess there could be multiple reasons. There could just be uncertainty of longevity, perhaps. You know, some folks, you know, are just hesitant to change, you know, to an extent. I have my doctor, even if you put the information right in front of them, I mean, I'm just being honest, you know, but generally speaking, unless you have a PCP or a specialist or something like that, that doesn't happen to be covered under the Cigna plan. And then again, we can look that up online, everybody in the state of Texas that's covered. Unless that's the case, in most instances, it doesn't make much sense not to, quite honestly.
Unless the claims history for your district is not as favorable as some of, because they do, there's, you know, there's some actuarials that get run based on that.
Right. In terms of us as a district, in offering it, yes, in comparison to why other districts may not, yes, sir.
And they don't know that until they have all of
Yeah.
their
I'm sorry,
claims
I guess I thought
analyzed.
Data.
you were asking why wouldn't an employee jump
Yeah.
from one to the other, but.
Employees
both of
different,
those
yeah.
scenarios, yes, sir.
No.
Right. No, that's right. And then also, one other thing, we said 2%, and of course, that's a raise, the insurance is.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but what are the other districts doing for raises around us that,
Um,
I know we've talked about this
We
before, but what
talked a little
updates
bit
have you
about it, yes,
heard?
sir, but, you know, Conroe did not give quite as heavy a raise as we gave in 1920. So in other words, they didn't spend all of their HB3 increase. They gave a 3% to midpoint, which is about as high as any that I've seen looking around. Tomball was 2% to midpoint. Our friends at Montgomery, unfortunately, I think that they were unable to do anything, is my understanding, and/or have a deficit budget. So, you know, it's kind of the, you know, anywhere, but you can look across the headlines across the state of Texas, and even, you know, the wealthy, so-called wealthy districts in Austin area. I mean, many of them are given minimal 1% to 1.5% raises, for sure. And there's some that are giving, you know, literally nothing, and then a very small bonus. So I think it's enough to obviously remain competitive and to not, and I guess at very least we're not getting any further behind of some of our peers who we've made strides to help, you know, close that gap over the last handful of years. We are not getting further behind. Again, you could kind of look at this year in comparison to Conroe and say that we're not quite with them, but if you look at what we did as a whole last year, it was more aggressive. So over a 2-year span, we're basically toe-to-toe with what Conroe's done, which is a good place to be. Any other questions on that? Okay. So here's what the numbers look like. Obviously, you know, the most important thing is we will be, assuming that we're given some okay and thumbs up from the board on this, we'll be recommending a balanced budget in August. Obviously, that's the most important thing. And then the rest of it basically is building off of current year actuals, plus the 2% raises, plus the bonuses. And honestly, it's that simple. We have nothing else on the expenditure side of things that we're really adding or detracting from the current year budget. It's actually fairly simple.
I forget, what kind of growth did we?
We have embedded, Chuck, basically 1%,
Okay.
right at 122 students. And of course, you know, the attendance thing, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty there, but what certainty is there is very positive.
Sure.
I mean, you know, we feel like, given the flexibility that the TEA has told us that we have at this point, in terms of removing any, you know, volatile signs in the first 2-6 weeks in particular, that there's a safety net there. Now, they have embedded a safety net on their side too.
Imagine.
For attendance purposes, because of the online format, in theory, we could never have a student absent, perhaps. And so they protected themselves on the top end, and we protected ourselves on the bottom end, where our attendance rate cannot exceed what it was in actually 18-19, if that makes sense. Because they can't really use 19-20 as a base year because of the uncertainty going on. And so there's a safety net on both sides, which is somewhat comforting. But, you know, obviously, I mean, the kids, they're not going to just disappear. So, I mean, they're here.
They're still
You know,
here.
We expect them to be in school and enrolled in some fashion. And so we anticipate receiving funds. We know that the housing market is you know, doing well in the area. And so we believe the 1% is, you know, conservative. and obviously it's a little more conservative than what we projected in 1920, but these are certainly uncertain times. There is somewhat of a safety net for formula transition purposes. For us, it kind of goes back into the fact that we weren't one of the winners, if you will, if you recall our
Yes, we
discussion on
weren't.
that. We kind of win now to an extent because we're guaranteed 103% of what we would have received under old law in the second biennium. So as long as our property values continue to grow and things of that nature, there's a safety net. Now, don't get me wrong, obviously if our ADA goes down, our funding's going to go down. But for the other components, there is a bit of a safety net for state funding purposes, which makes it a little bit easier to feel okay with a 1% projection. Any other questions? Okay. And I'll break this much down much further in August, where we show a comparison of percentage of budget versus state averages and things of that nature, and how we spend our dollars instructionally versus administratively and so forth, and it will continue to look good. So we'll kind of now transition into a quick discussion on tax rate. I really don't have much of an update from last month on this, so I'll go through it fairly quickly. Now, as of today, we still have almost $1 billion worth of tax base under ARB. So obviously that is the most uncertain amount of money that we've ever had at this time. Our certifications come next week. So we know that we're going to lose some value. We're a little over 8% in terms of property value growth. We've been using 8% as our projection. So we know it's going to land somewhat close, and obviously the big effect on that is on the INS side in terms of what we generate. On the M&O side, we know that if we grow less than projection, then our tax rate's going to compress less, but the end product's going to be the same in terms of local plus state funding. So it's relatively meaningless for funding purposes, but it will obviously affect our tax rate. So I think right now this projection is about as accurate as we could get it at this point. I talked with Tony Milanowski last week, and again, they are obviously having all kinds of obstacles and struggles in terms of meeting schedules and things of that nature with COVID and so forth. So there has been some movement over the last 2 weeks. It went from 1.5 billion to just under $1 billion under ARB, and we lost about 0.2%. So that's beautiful. Here's the history of our tax rates. I know the board is familiar with this. It's something that we show every year, but we capped out in the 0506 school year at $1.79. And have continued to maintain and decrease over the last several years. Questions on that? Comments? And this is a slide I showed last time. I'm not going to go through it in extreme detail again, but again, just to say that obviously our tax rate based on HB3 requirements will be tied to the property value growth. But we believe that it will decrease somewhere around, like I said, around 3 pennies. Okay.
So the worst thing that happens is that if they don't come in anywhere close to what they think,
Yes.
then the tax rate just goes up.
Or it doesn't go down. Correct. It
Right.
goes up from what it would have been.
Right,
Yes, sir.
right.
Yes, sir. We believe that obviously it will still go down slightly regardless of the end
Yeah.
product, but yes, sir.
Right.
It'd just be slightly higher. And or there might be some flexibility on the other side if we look at that.
Every regional real estate publication right now is talking about urban flight, that all of the unrest in the big cities is pushing people out, and Magnolia was the first name on the list for places people are going to as they're leaving the bigger cities around us, so I don't expect it to slow down.
We've got the future available lots that not many do. We have over 14,000 future undeveloped lots. So. I showed this last time. It's just a brief view of our debt picture. I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. Obviously, the biggest thing that I wanted to point out, in large part because of our refunding efforts and aggressive bond defeasance plan, over 50% of our debt will be paid off by 2028, which is a good place to be within 8 years. And we'll remain aggressive with that. And again, as a reminder, we looked at this last time. This is our 3-year bond defeasance plan. What we've adhered to each of these plans the last 2 years. Actually ended up getting just over $7 million in principal removed on the 2012 in year 2020. But again, we have identified the 2013 opportunity, which will save us another $2 million in principal, in interest. So over a 3-year span, we will have wiped off early $22.8 million that we've added for future capacity. Good place to be.
It's very good.
And I did this one just for Miss Eagle, because I know how much she likes it, but I updated our numbers in terms of comparing with our peers. Same group of ISDs that I've included in the past. And again, it kind of speaks to our efforts to make sure that we're utilizing our taxpayer dollars efficiently and paying down debt and saving on interest as we compare to the other folks here without intention to throw rocks, of course, in terms of our debt per student. I mean, it looks really good.
That's awesome.
Great.
Question on that? Okay. Oh, that's actually the last slide for the budget workshop. I know I went through it very, very quickly, but the remainder are all the other items that I have on the regular agenda. So, be glad to answer any questions if y'all have any, and/or we'll take the charge and carry on with it. We'll have the special call meeting, I forget the exact date, around August 5th, 6th, or something like that, after we receive our certified values and know what we're going to publish for public notice purposes for tax rate. And then beyond that, we'll have our public hearing in late August, 20th, or whatever the date is. Then we'll adopt the tax rates and budgets that night.
Well, I think the direction we're going is solid, unless anybody has any comments about that. I think it's a very solid path forward.
And I love your last slide.
Thank you.
Yeah, interest doesn't
Not,
add.
and not just for you, primarily.
We have shirts made.
A t-shirt with that on it.
Last slide, right?
We like that.
Okay. Well.
Looks
fair enough.
good.
We will carry on.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
we'll
you.
carry on.
Thank you.
And be ready for the next round when we get more information in that. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.